Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about Lost Solicide's new patch, Update 1.0112, and what it actually changes for you on PS5 and PC. If you're mid-playthrough, wondering whether to boot the game back up or you bounced off earlier because of weird bugs or performance quirks, I've got you. I've spent time going through the notes, mapping them to real moments in the game, and thinking through how they'll affect your experience from early chapters through the late game cleanup. This is one of those updates that doesn't just tinker around the edges. It quietly unclogs several progress stoppers, smooths out some rough presentation bits, and gives PC players wider screens a nicer view. It rolled out on October 30th, 2025. That's late evening for a lot of you, depending on your region. And it's on both platforms. Let's start with what I think most of you care about, the fixes that keep you from getting stuck. If you were early in the story and hit that odd softlock in Chapter 2 at Skycrest Badlands, specifically the Sky Mirror Lake section, there was a choice with Gethia where selecting Not Ready Yet could strand you in limbo. That's patched. So if you set the game aside after that hiccup, you should be able to update, reload, and proceed normally. I know moments like that can snap you out of the flow, especially so early, because you're still learning the rhythm of Caster's movement and Arena's assists. The last thing you need is a conversation choice turning into a trapdoor. This one is fixed across PS5 and PC. There are more chapter-based fixes that matter if you're working through the mid-game. Chapter 4 has been a hot zone for little gremlins, and this patch specifically calls out Caster falling through the world after the cutscene in the Royal Court of Frosthold during the Activate the Sky Tower step. If you've ever had that sinking feeling, literally, you know how deflating it is to have a dramatic moment cut to black and then find yourself underneath the map. That's gone. The team also cleaned up those energy collection minigames in Redstone Mines and, again, in Royal Court of Frosthold that sometimes wouldn't register properly, which meant you could play correctly and still fail with no feedback. That's the kind of frustration spiral that leads people to quit for the night. Glad it's addressed. Speaking of frustration spirals, weapon unlocks are a huge part of your build fantasy in Lost Solacide, and there was a very specific but painful bug where getting certain weapons didn't save properly. The Stygian Wraith Pole Sword, the Frostymite Greatsword, and the Ancient Thunder Greatsword. The patch notes say that if you were affected, the game will auto-grant those when you re-enter after updating. That's a classy fix. No busy work, no do the quest again nonsense. If you hit this earlier and thought you were losing your mind because your shiny new blade wasn't there after a reload, you weren't. Update and hop back in. Your arsenal should be whole. Now let's talk presentation and flow, because there are a handful of little tweaks that collectively make the game feel more intentional. There's a note about scenes in the harbor area not loading or unloading cleanly. You know those moments when you can feel the game stutter or pop as it transitions and it kind of breaks the illusion? That's one of those invisible quality fixes that you notice precisely because you stop noticing it. Traversal becomes more seamless and you spend more time thinking about your route and less about the engine's mood swings. They've also tuned a repeated line issue for Arena in some Chapter 4 encounters. If you've ever had the same line hit your ears twice in a row in the heat of a fight, it can make the encounter feel canned. This should be much improved now. And there's also a specific audio fix. The sword wave sound effect tied to Fusion Blast wasn't firing reliably. It should be back in sync with the move. Audio coherence is a bigger deal than people give it credit for. When a signature move doesn't land with the right whoosh or crack, your brain subtly devalues it. Getting that feedback loop right is core to a good action game. One change I'm happy to see is a small but smart UI UX option, a toggle for auto camera rotation during standby. You might not think you need it until you realize a lot of your comfort comes from what the camera does when you're not actively thumbing the stick. Some players like that slow presentational drift when you set the controller down. Others find it disorienting, especially if they're lining up a shot or studying a boss arena. Making it a simple setting puts control back in your hands, which is where it belongs. Flip it on if you want the world to feel alive while you plan your next move. Flip it off if you prefer a steady frame when catching your breath. The patch also touches NPC interactions, and I want to call this out because it's exactly the kind of small thing that adds up. Interaction logic for Liana has been refined, so you can interact with her anytime, instead of waiting for her current action to finish. It sounds mundane, but shaving off those micro annoyances, standing there for 2 seconds while a loop ends, makes the overall pacing smoother. These are the sorts of fixes that, when you string them together across dozens of hours, create that feeling of a game respecting your time. Performance heads, you're not left out. There's targeted optimization for the Water Golem's VFX in Chapter 3's Lithonics dimension. If you fought that boss and noticed your frame time graph look like a heartbeat monitor during certain particle-heavy attacks, that may ease up. On paper, it's a single encounter tweak. In practice, when a spectacle boss becomes more readable with fewer frame dips, you're more likely to react correctly and less likely to eat damage for reasons that feel outside your control. There's also an adjustment to Xana's eye line during multi-character dialogue in Chapter 4. Eye contact and gaze direction are subtle, but they're part of what sells a cutscene. You don't need full mocap magic, you just need characters to look like they're listening to each other. It's the difference between gamey and grounded. PC folks, you get a couple of platform-specific upgrades that are honestly overdue. The first is a fix for improper black borders on ultra-wide and wider aspect ratios. If you run 21:9 or beyond, and you've been punished with letterboxing that didn't make sense, this is good news. The second is an FOV optimization to widen your field of view on those wider aspects. In an action game where spatial awareness is half the battle, especially when you're weaving around ads to keep a beat on a boss, having that extra peripheral view feels like going from peeking through a keyhole to opening the door. And yes, that can absolutely translate into playing better, because you react to flanks and projectiles a split second sooner. Let's zoom out to what this means if you're still early in your journey. If you've just reached Skycrest Badlands and you're experimenting with builds, this patch effectively tells you, go ahead and choose your dialogue options without anxiety. Your progress won't brick itself. Explore the harbor without scene streaming weirdness yanking you out. And once you start collecting signature weapons, they should persist as expected. Also, consider toggling that standby camera setting before you lock in muscle memory. If you like the game feeling like a living diorama when you pause, keep it on. If you're all about precise control, try it off and see if it reduces any lingering discomfort during exploration. All of that adds up to a less brittle experience. If you're in the meat of the game, those chunky Chapter 3 and 4 sequences, notice what you don't notice. Fewer hitches and heavy VFX moments mean the fights you might have blamed on your rig or the engine may now feel fairer. The Casser through the floor incident after the Royal Court cutscene should be history, so you can stay in the moment as Activate the Sky Tower ramps drama instead of making you restart. And those mini-game interactions in Redstone Mines and Frosthold should behave themselves. That consistency is what lets you focus on execution. Parry windows, burst pursuits, and the cadence of Arena's assists. When the game state behaves, your skill actually gets to shine. If you've already rolled credits and you're cleaning up achievements or doing challenge runs, the knock-on effects are a little more subtle, but still real. Cosmetic as it sounds, Xana's adjusted eyeline during multi-character scenes makes repeat cutscenes less awkward to rewatch, and faster interactions with Liana mean less friction while you do quick turn-ins. Audio polish. Arena's lines not doubling up, Fusion Blast getting its proper auditory weight. Seems small in isolation, but it makes repeated combat encounters feel less grating. If you're running a high-res display on PC, the widescreen FOV changes make those late-game arenas breathe, so enemy tells are easier to read at the edge of your vision. That's the kind of improvement that speedrunners and challenge hunters notice first. Let's talk trust for a second, because updates like this also send a message. Lost Soul Aside launched with plenty of promise and just as many rough edges. Performance inconsistency here, animation funkiness there, and some clumsy invisible walls that made traversal feel stiffer than it looked.